Good afternoon. My name is Brenda Ravenscroft, and I'm the Dean of the Schulich School of Music. Today, we're paying tribute to Dr. Huntington Sheldon, an extraordinary contributor to the history and legacy of Mcgill University. A special welcome to Mrs. Adelaide Sheldon, who has joined us from Vermont to represent the Sheldon family, as well as to my colleagues here at the university and to the Mcgill community. Today I'm reminded of Christopher Wren's epitaph in St. Paul's Cathedral in London, Si monumentum requiris circumspice, or if you seek his monument, look around. Indeed, Dr. Sheldon's legacy surrounds us here, even here in Redpath Hall. In a few minutes, you will hear the university organ, a French Baroque organ conceived and constructed thanks to Dr. Sheldon. Over on the other side of campus, when our music library was still in a temporary space across Sherbrooke Street, away from our faculty, Dr. Sheldon understood the essential role of the library for the excellence that we have in our teaching and in our research, and it was his vision that initiated the construction of what is today known as the Elizabeth Worth Music Building. The Marvin Duchow Music Library now occupies the middle floors of this landmark building. So not only the center of the building itself, but actually at the heart of the Schulich School of Music, bringing together all members of our community, students, faculty members, scholars, performers, composers, and historians. Indeed, I never had the opportunity and the privilege of meeting Dr. Sheldon in person, but I'm acutely aware of the monuments that he established here at Mcgill. And yes, some of them are the bricks and the mortar and the metal pipes and the wood of the organ that we have here today, but more than that, he recognized how transformational these facilities would be for our school. And as a founding member of the Faculty of Music's Advisory Board, Dr. Sheldon also played a key role in shaping the evolution of the school. Later, we'll learn more about Dr. Sheldon's legacy as a teacher and as a researcher at Mcgill from my colleagues, Dean David Eidelman, Professor Richard Cruz, and Principal Emerita Heather Monroe Bloom. But to begin with today, we're going to have some music. Professor Emeritus John Grew, the former Dean of the School of Music and the longtime friend of Dr. Sheldon, will perform music by 17th century composer Nicolas de Grigny. The piece is a quiet meditation and was a favorite of Dr. Sheldon. It's a perfect example of the kind of music that this organ was in fact designed for. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor John Grew.
Hello, everyone. My name is David Eidelman. I'm the Vice Principal of Health Affairs and Dean here at the Faculty of Medicine at McGill University. And I cannot tell you how much of an honor it is for me to be present and to participate in a celebration of the life and legacy of Skip Sheldon, one of my most favorite professors. I want to recognize Mrs. Sheldon, the colleagues and friends who've come here today to celebrate someone who was, at least to the Faculty of Medicine, someone truly extraordinary. He was a gifted teacher, he was a brilliant researcher, he was an innovator, he was an Oslarian, and for those outside the Faculty of Medicine, that's high praise indeed. He was a medical history enthusiast and a dedicated volunteer and clearly a benefactor. He loved sport and he loved the outdoors, and he was an incredible role model for students. I was reflecting on the fact that 41 years ago, I was in his small group in pathology as one of his students, an experience that left an indelible mark on me. Those of you who've been to medical school know that you have so many teachers and so many courses that you don't remember everyone, but no one ever forgot being in Skip Sheldon's small group. He was many things to our faculty. He was the Strathcona Professor of Pathology for many years. He was known for having a sense of dramatic flair, and his pathology lessons were certainly never dry. And all of his former students will tell you about his extraordinary ability to connect pathology to the real life of patients and teach you the clinical implications of what you were learning. His weekly rounds in the autopsy room at the Royal Vic, for those who ever attended them, were absolutely legendary, hugely popular, and I distinctly remember returning from my short sojourn in Toronto, showing up one of those rounds and having him remind me that I still had a lot to learn about a subject I thought I knew a lot about. He also had, before my time actually, optional Saturday morning pathology sessions, which were always crowded, and they were referred to as magical because of the way in which he brought science and medicine to life. In addition to his brilliance as a teacher, he was a fantastic benefactor for our faculty. He provided the funds to create the Sheldon Biotechnology Center, which was launched in 1989 and really, at the time, allowed Mcgill to remain at the cutting edge and has remained active for a very long time afterwards. But in addition to his commitment to science and medical education, he was really committed to the preservation and understanding of medical history. He supported the Osler Library of the History of Medicine, and he really helped to put in place a permanent location for the Maud Abbott Medical Museum. And last week, I had the privilege of being present while the museum was reopened in a brand new exhibition space, befitting the collection it houses and its supporters. And I have to say, it was remarkable. I remember Dr. Sheldon using some of the specimens that are now very beautifully displayed, which he would put up for us to guess at what they were and figure out what was wrong with the patient from the specimens. This was a very robust way to learn pathology, I can assure you. But of course, he wasn't only a benefactor for our faculty, as you heard. He greatly benefited the School of Music, and countless international students took advantage of his scholarship program, but he was also generous to the Mcgill athletic program. There's no question that Skip Sheldon is a real Mcgill giant on whose shoulders we continue to build and try and inspire each new generation of McGillians to achieve great things as he did. We're certainly indebted to him, and we will honor him always. Thank you very much. Over to Dr. Cruz.
How to capture as wonderfully complex a person as Skip Sheldon. We've heard about Christopher Wren. I thought I would turn to that wonderful movie, Chariots of Fire, which opens with a service in honor of Harold Abraham. And the speaker states the following: "Let us praise famous men." Then goes on to say, "who were a glory in their day." And finally, we must honor their legend. Famous men, glory in their day, honor their legends. That's what we're here to do today. And what a man he was, and what legends go with him. We in the faculty only shared in a part of Skip's life, as everybody knows, I think. He had so many outside interests. My personal contacts were one of abandonment, by the way. When we agreed and were offered a position back at Mcgill, having been away for a while, I was told I had to do research. So I went to a biochemistry lab for a year where I got very marginal training in research. But I was content because I knew at Mcgill there were two people interested in musculoskeletal research. One was in the Department of Anatomy, Clive Solomons, and the other was Skip Sheldon. So I happily moved to Montreal knowing I'd have collaborators. Clive Solomons went to the University of Virginia before I got here, and I started talking to Skip. And you should understand that Skip, at that stage, he would have been about 31 or 32, and he was the world's leading expert on the ultrastructure of articular cartilage, that cartilage that every one of you walks on and slips on your fingers and stuff. He had, as an undergraduate and then postgraduate student at Hopkins, been the first person to use an electron microscope to examine articular cartilage. His papers were brilliant. He was asked to go around the world. And by the time I got here, he'd totally lost interest in articular cartilage. We were friends and colleagues, but I didn't get any help from Skip. He, by the way, I think at the time had moved on to the secretory mechanism of the silkworm. Now, you might think that's something not very important, but just think of the thousands of people around the world and the billions of dollars that depend on the secretory mechanism of the silkworm. So he was moving from a very important subject in human biology to another important subject. The Skip that we all knew depends on the lens through which we look. And we in the Faculty of Medicine, you've heard something from David about what a wonderful person he was within our faculty. Inspirational, creative, curious, able to make complex things simple, motivate people. His research was very broad-based. While he left articular cartilage, he was very interested in connective tissues in general. Many years ago, I edited a book on the biochemistry and physiology of the musculoskeletal system, and Skip wrote an introductory chapter on the origins of connective tissue. He essentially was talking about stem cells. They weren't quite as important then. It's brilliant. I say I edited the book. I wouldn't have touched a word in Skip's chapter. He wrote brilliantly, he thought clearly, and he put his thoughts down in a wonderful fashion. And that chapter could go in a book today with another couple of pages to bring it up to date. He was just a spectacular researcher. You've heard from David about his inspirational role as a teacher. I think we all were just in awe of his ability to communicate. It was really unbelievable. However, we, the people in the Faculty of Medicine, as I say, only shared a part. He was a true leader in our faculty. Morris, I think, will remember, Dr. McGregor, Dean McGregor will remember a committee called PACUM, the Permanent Advisory Committee on Undergraduate Medical Education, which consisted of many of the young, interested people in the faculty, not me, by the way. And Skip was the driving force behind that particular committee. Anything he got interested in, he became an expert, and he was an expert in the medical curriculum, and passed on to other things. But the people who look at Skip through different lenses will have similar experiences to the ones we have. The cross-country skiing community in Quebec, Skip was a driving force in establishing it, and again was a leader. If you go to the world of sailing, And I'm really sorry. I don't think there's anybody here who sailed with Skip, because it was such a, I take it back. You should be talking, and I hope I capture how great he was in that particular field. He sailed all of his life. Our friend Bernie Skinner, who I had hoped would have lived long enough to be here too, sailed with him for most of that life. He, when he left here, he commissioned the design of, I think, what was regarded as the greatest deep-water, blue-water sailing ship that was extant at the time. And when Skip commissioned something, he didn't just say, design me a ship. Skip was there for every single part of that design. He then sailed it with a skipper and a crew, but according to Bernie, there was no question who was in charge of sailing, that Skip was the skipper. And they won the majority of the deep water races that a person can win. And of course, he was sailing. He was in the process of finishing off a sailing race when he was injured in England after the race. So the sailors will probably be more in awe of Skip than we are. He genuinely was a world figure on sailing. And of course, when he left here, he didn't just go sit on a farm. Skip then became one of the leading sheep breeders in North America, perhaps in the world. I'm outside my field. He certainly had the finest herd in North America of his, and he did that by bringing his biomedical knowledge to selective breeding and essentially in vitro fertilization. So we have to praise him, we have to honor his glory, and we have to honor his legend. And that's what we're trying to do this afternoon. I hope that we've been up to the job. Thank you very much.
Skip and his relationship with the Faculty of Music at McGill. I first met Skip in 1974 here in Redpath Hall after a concert I was playing harpsichord with the flautist Jean Baxtresser, well known as the first chair of the Montreal Symphony and a teacher at McGill. This was in the series Faculty Fridays from Redpath Hall, which were broadcast nationally on the CBC. The dean at that time was the legendary Helmut Blume, and we have to thank Helmut Blume. He goes down in the history of McGill as the Dean of Music who saved the Faculty of Music, because there was great talk that the Faculty of Music should become just a department in the Faculty of Arts. The Redpath Hall was our concert hall, and it goes back a long time. The main concert hall for music at McGill was Redpath Hall all through the 60s and through most of the 70s. After the concert, this gentleman came out to me, introduced himself, and said, "Oh, I really liked François Couperin the best." The program was half François Couperin and the other half Bach. So, would you like to come to dinner? I have something I want to discuss. So I went to dinner. The discussion was, I think I need a harpsichord. I love the sound of the harpsichord, so where should I go? I suggested he go either to Boston or to a young builder who was just back from France, Willard Martin in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and who had spent time in Boston working with Hubbard and Dowd, and then in Paris in the shop of Dowd and Reinhard van Nagel, which is where I got to know Willard. He liked the idea of helping a young builder. So off he went to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and came back and told me, well, the harpsichord will arrive in 9 months. So I'll jump now to a snowstorm in January 1977. The city had come to a standstill and Mcgill was closed that day. The phone rang at 5 to 9. It was Skip. "I thought I'd find you at home. You're not going out, I hope." And I said, "No, I think Mcgill is closed down." And he said, "You've been talking about an organ in Redpath Hall. I think we need to talk about that. But first, have you any idea what an organ worthy of Redpath Hall, an organ worthy of Redpath Hall might cost?" I fell silent because I needed time to think that one over. I had no idea, and and he said, "Are you still there?" I said, "Yes, I'm thinking." And he said, "Well, what will it cost?" And I said, "Well, I don't really know, to be honest. Probably something between 150, we're talking in 1977, of course, between 150 and 200,000. And he said, "Well, if I said I would give 250,000, do you think that would buy an organ worthy of Redpath Hall?" And I said, "Probably, yes." Tried not to be overly enthusiastic, just to keep it calm. I was trying to stay calm. And he said, "Well, we should get together and discuss that." So in a few days, I got a phone call from his secretary, Irma Niemi, and she said, "Dr. Sheldon would like to see you." I have no idea what it's about, but so we made an appointment, and I go to visit him in his office. On his desk, he showed me a photo with his grandmother playing the organ in their home on Park Avenue. And he said, "This is the organ I grew up with, and my grandmother played the organ. So I love the organ." So I said, "That's wonderful." And he said, "You've been talking about this organ for Redpath Hall. What should we do?" And I said, "Well, there's a whole movement for historic copies. Nobody has built an organ in the French style. We're in Montreal. We have all these organs from Hamburg, Germany, which are not ideal at all for French music." And Skip said, "Oh, why not?" So I explained that to him. "Oh, I see. Oh, well, that makes sense. And, well, will you loan me some recordings? And I'd need to educate my ears." So we had another conversation and another meeting, and he laid down the conditions. First, it must be anonymous. All right, but who can I tell? Well, you'll have to tell your dean, but it must be anonymous. And he had known at that time the university organist was Donald Mackey. So you probably need to tell him, but it must be anonymous. So, and then who will build it? And he had understood right away with the information I had given him why it needed to be a French instrument. Should we have a French builder? And I showed him some literature written by Peter Williams. There were two leading scholars at the time, Peter Williams at Cambridge, who had written the European organ as a doctoral dissertation in the mid-60s, and Fenner Douglas, his book, The Language of the French Classical Organ, which went through several editions, Yale University Press, and Fenner Douglas went from Oberlin to Duke University. And Skip said, "Well, we must have something as good as Duke or Oberlin or Wellesley, or we had to be up there." And so I said, "Well, George Koenig in Sarre Union in France is the builder that Peter Williams thinks." So we go off to meet George Koenig and see an organ. He had just built a copy for Amsterdam for Evel Koenig. So Skip said, "I don't want him to build the organ, and I don't like him. You've told me that there are all these builders in Montreal. Can't one of them build it?" And I said, "Well, probably, although none of them have done it." So he said, "Well, introduce me to somebody." So I made an appointment with Helmut Wolff. We go out to Oka. He had just installed an organ in the Cistercian Abbey in Oka. And immediately there was a good rapport with Helmut Wolff. And Skip said, can you build a French organ? Helmut said, well, I've never done such a thing. And so Skip said, well, you'll have to go to France. So sends him off to Poitiers and to Souvigny, see the great Clicquot organs. And then, well, you'll need to get in touch with advisors. So we put him in touch with Xavier Darras, Pierre Ardouin, Anne-Marie Clairelin, to name some, and with whom he remained in contact. So the design had to be beautiful for the beauty of Redpath Hall, and I think we succeeded. Here we have this beautiful room, architecturally, which Skip admired and loved so much, with this wonderful English ambience, these hammer beams, and this lovely lady sitting in the loft who looks so French. If you know the tradition of French buffets, this instrument is modeled somewhat after Saint-Étienne-du-Mont and Saint-Germain-des-Prés. And immediately a connoisseur knows we have a French organ sitting in an English room. And voila. Skip was very pleased with this. And this was celebrated with the symposium L'orgue à notre époque, when the instrument was inaugurated in 1981. We had musicologists, composers, performers, organ builders, scholars representing France, Switzerland, Germany, Scandinavia, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Canada. And for 3 days, we had papers, 18 papers, and major concerts in the evening, played by Kenneth Gilbert, Luigi Ferdinando Tarlivini, and of course, Marie Clairelin. The papers were edited and published, and the editor was our university organist, Donald Mackey. The papers became known as the Little Red Book. Nothing to do with Chairman Mao, of course. But often I would go to meetings in the following decade, and people would refer to the Little Red Book, published at Mcgill, about the installation. So, it had a long, still I occasionally see articles referred to from the Little Red Book. And this, now I will jump to 1991, when I started my deanship. And the first thing was to create a faculty advisory board. And Skip was one of the charter members, along with Judge Alan Gold, who chaired our board, Pierre Baik, William Turner, Eric McLean, and Dr. Constance Pathy, along with my associate dean, Kenneth Woodman. So there were many things that were quite evident. It was pretty easy to see as you went up the front steps by Queen Victoria. The front steps were boarded up on the east side, so you could only go up beside Queen Victoria in the front door on the west side, step number one. The music library, the Marvin Duchamp Music Library, was across the street in an office tower. 16 rooms were condemned with spores coming out of the wall, including my old office. So the advisory board got to work, and Skip was never missed a meeting, and he was there with ideas and wanted to get to the bottom of things right away. Well, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about that? So the first thing I did was to take him over to visit the music library. And he met our incredible music librarian, Cynthia Livey, who had come from the Sibley Library at the Eastman School. She reassured him we can never have something like the Sibley Library. We are going to have a library for the future, Well, Skip immediately liked that idea. A library for the future. Well, John, you better get some people together and go visit some libraries and write a report. So I got Radoslav Suk from the School of Architecture, Sam Kingdon from Buildings and Grounds, my associate dean, our Kenneth Woodman, and Cynthia Livey, and off we go to visit 6 libraries. And then I produced in my office a 60-some page report on the state of music libraries and what we could do and how we could go about it. Skip liked this, and this was followed by a major donation, which you've heard about. And this was what launched the whole project. Skip also took a great interest in our music technology area. That was established by Wiesław Waszek, and first as sound recording, and then it evolved. And Skip helped with the funding of the Marr Lab in the basement here of Redpath Hall, which is still functioning. The Marr Lab was a multi-channel audio research laboratory built to conduct research in the emerging fields of surround sound and spatial synthesis. Several of the graduates from this program now hold major positions around the world. For example, Jeff Martin is in Denmark, a major position with Bang & Olufsen. And another graduate, Jason Corey, is now the Associate Dean for Graduate Studies and Research at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and the list goes on. The whole technology area has many, many facets, and I'd need all afternoon to explain this to you, but suffice it to say that our music technology has grown into one of the leaders in the world. And part of that is thanks to Skip's funding of this lab here in the basement. Now Redpath Hall goes around the clock, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. The sound recording people work through the night. So after concerts, when they finish gathering up the chairs or whatever, it's 11 o'clock, the sound recording people move in. They work through the night, different shifts, and wait until right through till the next day. And this idea pleased Skip that the space was being used and used to good advantage. There are many, many facets. He would come to operas. He was so excited about the student productions. And I remember once Tales of Hoffmann, one of his favorite operas, and I got a lecture on the libretto and a lecture on E.T.A. Hoffmann and the characters and what this had to say about humanity. On I could go. Yes, Skip was indeed a Renaissance man, and he fully understood and valued the role music played in our lives, as well as all the arts. For him, there was no division, as in the C.P. Snow novels of the era. Music, all the arts, all that makes us human. And then Skip introduced me to the writings of Anthony Storr and gave me a little book, which helped me a lot making speeches. The little book was Music and the Mind, and Storr begins by a quote from an old Scottish surgeon of the 17th century: "Music is the medicine of the mind." So now it's my pleasure to introduce, I told you Skip got a harpsichord. He wanted to learn to play it. He thought he would learn to play it and be able to play the well-tempered clavier complete. And so I need a harpsichord teacher. So I sent him Professor Hank Knox, who was an undergraduate at the time. And that lasted about 3 months. Skip phoned me, he says, John, I have realized I'm not going to be able to play the well-tempered clavier as quickly as I thought I might. so you'll have to call off your man. But please tell him I think he's an excellent teacher, and especially I enjoyed the conversations we had after the lessons. We rescued Hank from mathematics and a career in IT. So here is Hank Knox, who's well known to you in Montreal, one of the founders of Ensemble Arion, one of the early graduates in harpsichord in my class back in the 70s, and who's made numerous recordings. He is still conducting the Baroque Orchestra at Mcgill, and once a year we produce a Baroque opera with a Baroque orchestra, and I can proudly say we're the only school in North America which does such a wild underground activity. Because early music was pretty much an underground activity in the 70s. Anyway, without further commentary, here's Professor Hank Knox to play François Couperin, L'Amphibie, a piece which Skip loved.
Thank you, Hank, and John as well for bringing Skip's music so majestically into this room that Skip and so many of us love dearly. I'm Heather Monroe Bloom. It gives me great pleasure, really an honor to be here to close the words in the celebration of Skip and his life and his association over 4 decades or more with Mcgill University. Del, Sheldon, I want to say how much it means to us to have you here with us and for me to have had a chance to speak with you and speak about Skip with you and Kate, Roger, family, friends who are here. It's terrific. Roger, you should know, has crossed the Atlantic on several voyages with Skip, and he brought another dimension to our understanding of this complex persona that I'll refer to in a moment. But I want to just say to you, Del, that the gathering here today is such a reflection of the honor and respect we hold for Skip, and through you and your girls, to him and his memory. We have Ram Panda, who's the chairman of the Board of Governors. We have a number of deans emeriti. We have alumni, donors, champions and ambassadors for Mcgill in a number of areas, certainly very much in medicine and music. And having Dean Idleman, Dean Ravenscroft speak as they did, Deans Emeriti, Cruz and Grew speak, really shows some sense of the span of Skip's contribution. I got to know Skip over a shorter period of time than most, but really the better part of the decade that I served as principal. And my memory, and memory is interesting because Skip was such a powerful person. I may be conflating images, but my memory is that the first day that I met him, I got a little note passed to me by a colleague in the outer office of the principal's suite saying, "Dr. Sheldon is here." You could hear the urgency in the tone, and ... and he is one of our great people. So that was kind of the introduction, and I think Skip had been on campus and decided to drop by the principal's office, and in he came with an enormous confidence of bearing, and you really did have a feeling with him that you were in the presence of someone who was great, and I had then the task of figuring out exactly what his background was as I got to know him in those early moments. And he began talking about the Faculty of Music, which he had just come from. And so we had a wonderful conversation about that, and I told him about the organ being played at my installation ceremony as principal and how remarkable it was to have that experience, really something that I think everyone who had attended will remember as a hallmark. And then he started to talk about medicine and Johns Hopkins and what were we doing to make sure that we were remaining as competitive as we ought to be in medicine. So I started to think I'm maybe talking a little bit too much about music and we should shift to medicine. And I finally said, "Why don't you tell me about yourself?" And forgive me because it was early days in my time as principal. And he told a tiny bit of the story that we've all heard alluded to today by our decanal colleagues. But as I got to know him over those years, I realized he was really a pioneer in what a former colleague, an alumnus, and a philanthropist could be. He cared so deeply about the place. He was truly visionary in thinking that we should think of no discipline as a solitary discipline, that we ought to be thinking about music and medicine and how these would come together. And I think he would have taken great joy in the extent to which certainly the brain and the neurosciences and music have come together in a prominent way at Mcgill. He talked about the whole person and the education of the whole person, and was very proud of the scholarships he'd created for undergrad scholars, but also for athletics, as Dean Idleman referenced. He cared about the physical place, and as a principal who really felt one of my obligations was to begin to beautify this magnificent campus in a time still of scarce resources, that he would come on campus and with every new development, certainly the beginning of the sandblasting of the great building housing the Faculty of Music, the building onto the Faculty of Music, but then the cleaning of the buildings, the gardens that we were creating. And then, of course, you realize he was a great horticulturalist. He could have talked about gardens for a long period of time, just on and on. He had this tremendous capacity to give you advice, tell you you ought to be thinking more about something you weren't thinking about. I never remember a time he was wrong in doing that. In pushing hard on standards, but it didn't take long to realize that he was someone who put himself to the highest standards, and he was being a little easier on everybody around him because he expected so much of himself. So you've heard about this. Two elements that I thought I might add to our celebration of him, and there could be so much more, and I know, Del, we do well to hear from you directly, but today's not the day. But informally, maybe after the formal part of the ceremony, I said to Roger, if you went back and forth across the Atlantic winning all these trophies, surely Skip was a party man. And Roger, what did you say? Absolutely, with enthusiasm. And I think some dimension could be added to that. The other, and Skip and I did talk about this at length, was his love of Del, of you, Del, and of his family. And I did have the feeling with him that this man who mastered just about everything that he took on lived his life in awe of the complexity of family life, of human development, of having children and bringing them into the world, and the tremendous sense of protectiveness that he had, and the deep, abiding sense of partnership he had with you, both in the raising of your children and the expression of his passions, which you were such a partner to, and in the life that you shared in the country and day in and day out. So I really want to close on that, because he was a man, he was a husband, he was a father, in addition to being a doctor, a teacher, a sailor, a sheep raiser, and so much more than that. And we thank you for giving us the opportunity to remember him today. There is no question that his touch here at McGill University will last long, long into the generations ahead. The fact that this room has gone from being a library to being a hall, to being this grand place that it is so much a part of his own vision and sense of what McGill should be, and how proud it should be in every element of how it expresses itself. So thank you for giving us the honor of recognizing that. And I want to thank all of you for coming today to celebrate him. We will hear one last piece. And John, thank you again so much for, I think John's already moved upstairs, for your contributions, along with Hank's, to bringing music into this great space. And we're going to hear now François Couperin's Offertoire sur les grands joues. And after that, I would ask everybody to remain and join us and Del and her friends who are accompanying her in a refreshment and social gathering outside of this hall. Thank you.